Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That is me. With me today is a guest episode, and that guest is none other than somebody you already know. If you've been listening to this program, it's Steven Anderson. Hi, Steven.
Hello, everyone. What's up, Scott? Thanks for having me.
What's up, Steven? Dude, absolutely. I just waved to Steven. We're recording this in video so we can see each other. If you're listening to the podcast, you can't hear me wave, but I was just waving there. So what we want to talk about today is something that's super fresh in my mind and in Steven's mind. And so that's why I wanted to record this episode. It's a very tactical episode. You know, typically we bring in guests and we talk about all kinds of really specific topics from an outside guest. And this time, Steven and I felt like, you know what, we've actually feel like we're kind of experts in this particular topic. So we wanted to tackle it on our own because the topic is so fresh in our minds. And so let me present to you the topic. Ready? Drum roll, please. I don't know if you can hear that. That's me tapping on my plastic bucket on my desk that's holding up my computer. Today's topic is live events, running live events and thinking about those live events in two ways. So one is a live event just for customers. So thinking about a customer-led live event. And then also, if we have time, thinking about a more public live event that you could do as a workshop type of format or any other type of format where you're inviting non-customers to that live event. And so the reason that this particular topic is so fresh in our minds is because just last week, at the time that we were recording this, we ran what we call our client intensive. So our client intensive is a 2-day event where we bring our clients together. We do this 3 times a year. We're bringing them together in a physical space, and we work on teaching new stuff. We help them problem solve challenges that they're facing with sales and with their businesses. We work on some planning, and we generally build community. And so lots of really, really good lessons, not just for us, but also really good examples outside of our company of companies that are doing customer events. Steven himself has lots of experience running events himself out in the New York area. And so we just wanted to talk about the importance and share some very specific tactical ideas around running a customer event. So Steven, since you're sort of the semi-guest here, I wanted to ask you, like, as both an observer in the 2-day event that we just did last week, as well as an organizer and a facilitator, what did you see? What would be your top 2 or 3 takeaways, or what would you tell somebody that was thinking about doing a customer event, a customer only event? What are some of the top reasons that you would tell somebody, like, oh man, you absolutely have to do a customer event?
The key thing is, I think you kind of talked a little bit about it, is community. So at least at our company, and maybe for some of you listening, you don't see your customers a ton, and the way you interact with them might vary. So anytime that you can get people to take time from their busy day to come into a room, you really should take the opportunity, especially if you can get those people to share their stories with each other. So as in our example, we work with entrepreneurs and CEOs and VPs of sales and people who are on the front lines of building their companies. And sometimes that can be a lonely experience. So being able to create and curate an event with like-minded people who are experiencing very similar things and have these war stories or whatever to share, and building ways that they can continue to be successful really makes them feel included, makes them feel excited, and gives them something that they can take from the event to put into their business and make them more effective the following week. And it's amazing to see all their lights really bright and excited and them being able to do that. So that'd be number 1 reason I'd say to do one. It's a great opportunity to continually add more value to your customer base.
Yeah, so the community aspect is something that when we put together these events, and I'll share some examples of other events, big and small, that other companies do. I don't think a lot of us, we go to run this event, this 2-day client event intensive, and we sort of built it up as like, hey, we're going to teach you new stuff, new sales frameworks, new ways to problem solve with your clients, new ways to manage and plan out your days and your weeks and your months ahead. Time and time again, what we always leave with is the community aspect, like getting the same like-minded people in the room that have the same challenges, that have the same problems, that are struggling with the same things that you're struggling with every day, and hearing people help each other and genuinely being interested in helping each other was a huge takeaway for us as an observer. Like, it felt like almost cheating in that all we had to do is get the people in the room, and then they were working with each other just as much, or if not more, as we were teaching them stuff from the front of the room.
Yeah, I'd also add to that, it really helps to remember why you do what you do. So I don't know how ever, anyone listening interacts with their customers. We are remote, so it's mostly on Zoom and web conferences and stuff, but there's nothing like seeing all of the hard work you've done to win clients, know that you've added value, and then that they see you've added value and that they're willing to come into a room and spend more time with you is really just like it's very humbling. It's also like oh my gosh, I got to do something moment, but it's also in some ways a forcing function. It's like, no, we do add value. We've been adding value. We can add more value, and let's continue to ride this momentum that we get from these events to share this experience with more customers, because there is something here. So on that side of it, it's also super reassuring to the mission that you've put out, that customers are willing to take time from their day and bring their team members and be like, hey, this is some stuff you have to learn about. We want to share it. That's also a great experience. So those would be my top two reasons for getting people involved. And it's also kind of fun.
Kind of fun. Yeah, we'll talk about the fun stuff in a couple minutes. On your second point there about getting your customers to spend time with you, I think it's an enormous amount of validation for how important you are to your customers. So whether you're selling a software product or a service or something in between, when you see that your customers have flown across the country, or in some cases across the world, because we have clients that are in Europe. We had a client in our September event that came all the way from Norway to come to this event. And to see that validation, like, man, you guys are so important to the growth and so critical to how we implement our strategy with our companies, that we're willing to spend the time and spend the money and be 100% focused on working on just this one part of our business. And so, you see this with other big events. A lot of times when you think about big company events, whether it's, HubSpot has their big inbound conference. That's a HubSpot event, isn't it? The inbound?
Yeah, pretty sure.
Yeah. Obviously the biggest one that a lot of people talk about are things like the Oracle. There's the Oracle user conference. There's Dreamforce with Salesforce. Now these have grown to be hundreds, more than 100,000 people descending upon the San Francisco Bay Area to do these events, but they weren't always, 150,000 people coming to these events. I went to a meetup group event a couple of years ago, and one of the panelists was a guy named Nick Mehta, that some of you might recognize that name. He's the CEO of Gainsight. And they did their very first customer event as a software platform when they only had 6 customers. And I was like, that really hit me, because now they have their own client event, and it's thousands of people that go, tens of thousands of people, I think, that go to the Gainsight customer success event every year. But they started with 6 customers. And so being able to validate, like, man, even with 6 customers, we're so important to these customers that they're willing to take time away and learn more, not just about how the software works, but how can we really impact their business, and how can we learn from each other. That it's almost like a high that you get to know that you're really adding value beyond just like, hey, I helped you convert that deal, or I helped you set up that lead funnel.
Yeah, it reinforces the why of why you're doing what you're doing. And I thought that was really a nice cherry on the top of all the planning and the implementation it took to put something like this on.
Yeah. And the last thing I would also say related to what you had just shared, Stephen, is that you get different conversations. The visual I was getting in having a live event is like removing this digital shroud that you have. So even with conference calls and Zoom video and, Slack channels, all these other things, you're communicating constantly with your clients, whether it's on email or training or video or whatever that is. But there's always this sense of like this layer, this digital layer between you and them. And when you get them in the room and they're 100% focused and their laptop is away and they're not worried about the next meeting, because you're meeting with them from 1 to 2 and they've got another meeting at 2:00. Like, they don't have that when you have a client event, whether it's a half a day event or a 2-day event like we have. They're just like, hey, we're here to focus on this thing. And they start sharing with you what's going on with their business, whether it's related directly to your product or service or not. They share with you things that they love about your product and service that you didn't even know that they loved. And they also share with you things that they would like changed, or that they may not feel comfortable telling you in an email or over video. And they say like, actually, when you do these things, like these are really great. And these things are not so important. And the not so important things might be things that we're spending like tons of time and effort on delivering what we think is value. And then you go and talk to somebody and they're like, that's okay. Wow. Okay. And so just getting in that physical space where you have the time to sort of connect with people through the coffee breaks and through the lunches. And then we do a dinner event on Thursday night as well. I think removing that digital shroud really opens up the communication and the amount of immersion of customer development that you can get in that event, whether it's half a day or a couple of days. I think is really hard to replace on phone calls and Zoom and surveys and NPS scores and all those other things.
Yeah, it makes it human again.
Yeah, human to human. Yeah, I like that. So like a couple of things I wanted to sort of transition to now. I feel like we're kind of building the case that even if you have 6 customers, you're a startup out there, you got 6 customers, we're like, okay, you should do this because it worked for Gainsight. I do want to talk a little bit tactically about what you could be doing in these 2 days, because I think a lot of us, if you haven't done a live event, how do I fill 2 days? How do I fill 1 day? How do I fill a half a day? Like, what do I actually deliver in that day that's valuable to customers, that doesn't feel like 3 hours if it's a half day event of just like product demo, because people don't want that. They can get that going to your website. So I wanted to share some ideas. And Stephen, I also want to hear from you how you run some of your events, about how do we create an environment, how do we create an event that people want to come to, because they feel like, wow, there's stuff I'm going to get at this live event that I'm not going to be able to get anywhere else. And so I mentioned at the top of the recording kind of 4 areas that we focus on is learning. So what new information can we bring in, teach people that might be difficult to do on a virtual training or might be difficult to do in a Zoom call. We do lots of group activities, and those group activities are oftentimes with the people that bring their teams or intra teams. So we'll have teams pair up and work on certain things together where they're brainstorming ideas. And that's an environment that you just can't reproduce digitally. It's very hard to reproduce digitally when you're doing a lot of group work or teamwork. So that's sort of one area that we focus on, is the learning. And sometimes a lot of times that learning, of course, is from me or the people in the team here. And we've also brought in guests. So we brought in guest speakers. And I think that's an area where in your marketplace, there's probably a bunch of experts, whether they're consultants or CEOs of other related companies, that you could bring in and have them teach something about their perspective on the marketplace. So we've had people like Mary Lou Tyler, who co-wrote Predictable Revenue, and she's a lead author of Predictable Process Prospecting. We had Jen Spencer. She's come to us a couple of times. She's been a speaker at Inbound. She's awesome. Those of you who are listening to this podcast probably know Jen from different groups and different threads. We have a smaller mastermind group that meets on Saturday. We had Aaron Ross come in and speak to that group of CEOs to talk about sales hiring and sales, like SDR, AE, account management teams. So whether the learning comes from you or comes from your guests, I think that's one of the main things that people would want to come to an event for, is to sit there and learn new stuff. And so, Stephen, how about you? When you run some public events, what are some things that you've done to teach people new stuff to make them want to come?
So most of the events that I run are somewhere around like pitch competitions. So new entrepreneur with a company or an idea, sometimes just in that case, they don't have a chance to get feedback on if they're going in the right direction or if it's the right thing that they should be doing or whatever. So one of the things we leverage is our network of VCs. We actually get real live breathing venture capitalists in to listen to their pitches and give them actionable feedback that they could not get without, potentially booking a meeting. And generally speaking, that's a very inside thing to get a meeting with a VC. So if we can leverage that and provide that, that's a huge value add. It helps people get meetings. Also, we provide a fun environment. So it's all people who are in that same environment. So it's entrepreneurs, it's venture capitalists, it's entrepreneurs. We offer pizza and beer. So we have that community aspect of where, hey, come in, have some food, talk to some people, build some relationships. We do giveaways, and we have a cool venue that is sponsored by Barclays Capital. So like a really cool, like co-working type of space that adds to the vibe. I'd say venue is super important to getting people excited and interested, makes them feel important. It feels exclusive. It feels like they can't get it anywhere else. So I'd say those are some important parts to it. And again, like the IP that you offer. So in our instance here, we have extensive experience from you, Scott, and industry leaders that we've had, that they can't get without buying a book or, booking this person over here. And the fact that we've curated it based on their need, their stage, and the pains that we understand from them, from working with them, makes it very, very personal. So it's not just a thing they can go online and find. It's like, hey, no, we built this directly for you. And for anyone listening, if you are building an event for public or otherwise, knowing your market and why they would care to know about a thing is essential, because you don't want to have an event where they can just download the information or read an article. You want to give them something that they need to come to you to get. And whatever that nugget is, for us, it's, for some of the events that I've done, it's, hey, you're in a room with people who make decisions, and you can now start a relationship with someone in this field that you could never get anywhere. It's a good place to come.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there, like especially when you're talking about having those guests and the learning opportunities. For you with the pitch competitions, in say a venture capitalist, it might be really hard to get in one-on-one time with, right? That person's getting meeting requests every day, and they're probably saying no to most of those. For that venture capitalist, though, when you can say, look, the value for you as a speaker to come in is you're going to get access to a whole room full of entrepreneurs at various stages. So it's not just you, or it's not only a give for you, you're also going to get. And for the people in the audience, that is a person that they may not have had access to otherwise. And so you're the one that's bringing it to them. And so that's when we think about guest speakers that we've brought in. I mentioned Aaron Ross. We've also had Patrick Campbell, for example, who is the CEO of ProfitWell, which is formerly Price Intelligently. And so like these are people that are experts in their areas. And so those are people that otherwise you'd have to pay a huge amount of money to get one-on-one time with them, to get them to talk about, whatever topic it is that is their area of expertise. And so that is an enormous amount of value to know, like, okay, I could go listen to Jen Spencer at the Inbound conference, but I'm going to have to go across the country, and she's going to be one of 40 speakers, and I'm going to be in a room of 1,000 people. Or having her come and teach a couple of different sessions around buyer personas and long tail search and how to do blogging the right way and those kinds of things in a room full of 40 people, where she's going to be like over your shoulder, like, oh no, that's not a good blog post title. This is a good one. That's how we make the adjustment. And all of a sudden, you're getting that more intimate version of what they would otherwise just teach on stage for 90 minutes. Like, you're actually getting one-on-one help for people that otherwise you'd have to pay lots and lots of money to get access to them. So when you're thinking about who can you bring in, and how can you add value with the guests, it's not just the person who's going to give you the canned speech that they always give, but you want it to be somebody who's going to be able to personalize it to that audience.
Definitely.
You touched on venue, and so I do want to talk about logistics in a couple of minutes. There's a couple other sort of topics or ways to think about structuring the day that I had in my notes I wanted to go through really quickly. So we talked about learning as being number one thing you can do, whether that's you teaching or guests teaching. It could be customers teaching themselves. So we have this, I mentioned this separate mastermind group that we run on Saturday after our 2-day event. And one of the things we have those teams do, or those CEOs in that part of that group, we do what's called a 10-minute teach. So each person goes around the room and says, this is a 10-minute tactic that's worked really, really well for me, and I want to share it with you. And so in the one we had on Saturday, we had one of our CEOs shared 4 different books that he and his co-founders both read, and how they implemented what they read into their hiring and culture process. We had another CEO talk about how he goes through his process of finding mentors and advisors. We had somebody else talk about their operations manual. So these are just really short 10-minute bursts, but there's an opportunity for clients to teach each other. So that's an opportunity for you as well, if you're thinking about running a customer-led event. Go find your best customers and have them teach how they're using your product, or how they're solving for whatever problem is the key problem that room has. And so then that actually brings me to the second area, this idea of problem solving. One of the things that we've done is create what we call mastermind pods. So in our larger event, we do groups of 5 and 6, and people just do a standard around the room mastermind. I think we did 9 minutes each, 1 minute to share your question, and then 8 minutes to get feedback and help from the other people around you. And that's a way for people to problem solve together in a way that you don't have to be up there all day teaching, because there's enough value and enough knowledge in the room that people can help problem solve each other. It doesn't always have to come from you in front of the room. This is probably one of my favorite part of the events, to see not just the community aspect, but then seeing people after that hour that they did the mastermind with each other. They're like, man, I just knocked out one of the biggest challenges I've had in 9 minutes. And that was pretty cool. Let's see, two other things. Planning. So that's another thing you can do, is just helping the teams and your participants in your event. Just sit down and like help them build out a plan. Like, if you're an expert in the problem that you solve and your product helps your customers solve that key problem, then one of the things you do is have like a module just around planning. Like, hey, over the next 3 months, we do 100-day sales plans. Like, over the next 100 days, these are your big projects that you want to work on and knock out in the next 100 days. You could do the same thing for your product or service. You say, look, let's help you build out a 100-day implementation plan. So maybe you're using the product 25% of what you could be using, and we have these other feature sets that you just haven't had a chance to implement with your team. Well, let's help you build out a 100-day plan to help you implement that. Maybe let's organize some training. Let's train the trainers in those 100 days. So just giving your users a chance to sit and think about how could they further apply your product. That's a place where you could have a huge amount of value, because they're going to walk out of there not just with ideas, but a real plan of action to actually go ahead and implement and use your product even more. So then you're even further locked in. And then the fourth one, which I wanted to talk about, because you mentioned like pizza and beer, and we alluded to this earlier about having fun, which is community. So one of the things that we do is we do an optional dinner especially for teams that might be from out of town. Stephen was organizer of our big dinner. We had like 20 some people. It was like almost like planning a mini wedding. But getting people to opt in for a dinner. And I'd love for you to talk maybe a little bit about logistics, couple touch points on the logistics on what makes for a fun event within the event to help build community. That's not just like learn, plan, problem, but actually gets people networking and talking to each other and interacting with each other. Because you did some really, really great stuff with the dinner that we had this time around. I'd love for you to share it.
Sure. So we chose a Mexican restaurant. One of the things is that's pretty broadly applicable. Most people like Mexican food, so that appeases a larger group of people than, let's say maybe Italian food or other things. So that's one. Price point was favorable. Place had great reviews, and they were super easy to work with. So we could book out like a whole half of a room. And then one of the things was we just made it kind of buffet style, and then set the room up to allow for additional collisions. So as we mentioned, community super important. And yes, our company provides the community, but the community needs to bond with itself for it to be properly valuable. So we set up the food and we had drinks and stuff, and we kind of just had introduced people throughout the course of the day. And next thing you know, it's like, oh, I'm going to lunch with this person tomorrow, or, oh, like, I think we could do business together. It's really about setting up an environment that makes people feel open to being themselves and sharing. And this one particular restaurant, has good food, which always makes people set their guard down a little bit. And then also just you could tell everybody was into the event and was really happy to be there. So we just continued to, ask more questions and talk to them a little bit more about their businesses. And then when they would say something that was interesting, one thing that I pride myself on is filing away information. So if somebody's like a sport fisher, I hear somebody else does sport fishing, I make sure that they get a chance to talk with each other and make that introduction, because those are the bonds that really help people continue to stay in the community and find additional value beyond their business on the human side of things.
Yeah, I love the word that you use there, collisions, because there was a point, you may or may not remember this, where you and I were kind of standing at the back of the room just watching the 20 or so people interacting with each other. And I just kind of looked at you. I'm like, we don't have to do anything, right? These people, you can just tell they're not even just talking about work anymore. They're just talking about life and where they're from and what they love to do, and talking about kids and family and all of that stuff. And so creating that environment, we ran the same event. Well, I'm happy to give a plug to the restaurant. It's called Lolo's SF, because they were really great to work with. It's in the Mission. And one of the things that we did this event in September, and we had just kind of like one big long table, kind of, you know, Thanksgiving style dinner. And we had a couple minutes before when people were first getting in where they could grab a margarita or a beer or something if they wanted to. And there was some mingling, but then dinner came and they're like, okay, everybody sit down, here comes the food. And they brought all the food out and it was family style, but still, you know, you've got this big long table at 20, 25 people. And so one of the couple of the clients after the last one said like, dinner was really awesome. We'd love to do more mingling. And that's where Stephen worked really hard with the restaurant to say like, we want to foster an opportunity for people to talk with each other, not just for the first 15 minutes or 30 minutes, but for the whole 2+ hours. And so we just worked with the restaurant and they were really good about suggesting, okay, well, we can just, instead of, you know, one big table, you have like these little 3 or 4 tables off to the side. We'll bring chips out and then we'll bring the food out. And then they had waiters and servers just doing appetizers. So everybody could just basically stand the whole time if they wanted to, but we had seats if they wanted to sit. And throughout the couple hours, we just saw lots of people rotating from person to person and group to group. And by the time we left, we were watching people exchange phone numbers and contact information. And like Steven said, I heard people saying, you know, talking to each other like, oh, we should catch up out of here because, you know, we're going to be doing the same thing and maybe we can talk about ideas to work with each other. And so just creating that environment, I thought you did a particularly good job of organizing that in a way that helped people. Like it was fun. It's a great venue. It was, you know, fun to go eat, you know, California Mexican food in the Mission District. So it really suited the personality well. And people just, they really, really loved it. One of the things I want to, in terms of if you're worried about like expenses on the logistics side, for our events, we just tell people, look, it's optional and we do what's called treat. So if you want to come, it's just, you know, we do a set price per person. If you RSVP and you're in, then we just grab a credit card from you and then you pay for you and your team. And what that helps us do is just reduce our own exposure to these kinds of events, but then also make sure that if people, you know, it's the old adage, when people pay, they pay attention. And so, you know, if you say, oh, we're going to have this big dinner and it's included as part of the event, then you'll get people that say they're going to come to the dinner and then they don't come. And now you've paid for twice as many people that actually showed up. And the same thing with alcohol. We sponsored like a small margarita bowl or something just for people to have like a little margarita if they wanted it to. But, you know, if people want their own alcohol and stuff, we just say, hey, if you want your own booze, that's cool. Just do a separate tab or go up to the bar. Because again, it's not a party. It's not a drunk fest. It's an opportunity for people to sit and chill and get some food after the first day of 2 days. So don't be shy about that. I mean, I really want to relay that. If you're thinking about doing a live event, don't feel like you have to feed everyone and you have to buy alcohol for everyone and get everybody drunk. Like they don't care about that stuff. Everybody's got an expense account anyway. So just make it reasonably priced and you'll be fine.
I think adding to that too is I always think like, is this something I would want to go to? Right? Like approach it as in like, I'm going to be spending time here. I want to enjoy myself too. So I'm not saying that means it needs to be expensive, but it should be an environment that's conducive to you being relaxed. And by extension, that makes your customer relaxed or whoever's coming to the event. Cause it's like, oh, I can tell you're actually having fun here. I want to have fun too, because this is obvious. This is a good thing. So I would say definitely put that into an equation for a venue or whatever event you're putting in. Like make sure it's something you would want to go to and you would want to tell your friend about, because you do a great job at those events. Your customers will tell their friends like, oh, how's your trip to California? Oh, it was amazing. That dinner was crazy. The venue was amazing. Like I had such a good time. I can't wait to go to the next one. And that's exactly what you want to hear. And you want them to tell any other person who might have a similar need or, you know, any place they go. That's what makes your business have a long tail in the real life, makes them want to come back. So definitely put that in where you can.
Yeah, and I like the idea of like make it something that you would want to go to. I think of it as just like pick whatever venue you do, for example. It should be aligned with who you are as a company, as a culture. Like again, Steve, you did a really great job of vetting out lots of different places we could go to. There's shortage of restaurants in the Mission, but some of them are like, oh, it's $150 a head or something crazy, or it's like white tablecloth. I'm like, that's not us. Like, yeah, we're like California Mexican, good food, not too expensive. We don't mind spending a little bit of money, but you don't have to go crazy on $500 bottles of wine and like, you know, big fillets that are $50 each. It's like, it's not, yeah, good food is important. Venue, environment, and the company is even more important. And so, even inside of our events on Thursday and Friday, we had the option of the venue itself. They say, hey, we'll make coffee available. We'll just keep the coffee filled and make sure that there's coffee available all day. And we did that in September, and we're like, it was okay. It was also really expensive to pay for them to just keep filling up the coffee. But me personally, if you've watched any of my videos or you know anything about me, I'm a huge fan of Phil's Coffee, which is based in San Francisco. It turns out our venue happened to be a half a block away from the original Phil's in the Mission. And so for this event in January, we actually made it a thing where we're like, hey, we're going to bring in Phil's Coffee both Thursday and Friday morning. So when you arrive to check in, don't worry about bringing coffee. We're going to pay for Phil's Coffee, which is like a couple $100 total for both days to go get Phil's Coffee. But it added personality that matched who we are and what we do. And people were laughing because they know how much I like Phil's Coffee. So now I see them in person. They're like, oh, this is really great. You have Phil's. And so just thinking about things in that way, it just felt a lot more natural to go eat at Lolo's and have Phil's Coffee than, go eat at some stuffy place and have the same old brewed coffee that everyone else has. And those are the kind of ways that you can make an impression that it's not just a software package that they're buying, but they're actually buying you and your company. You're buying that human on the other side too. So we got a couple minutes left. I do want to talk about venue because you brought it up as well, Stephen. And so for you, and when you're picking your events, you mentioned about having an event that feels fun and it feels exciting to be there. You mentioned something about a venue that Barclays. You said they sponsor it, or like tell us a little bit about your venue, and then I'll talk a bit about ours. And I think that'd be a good stopping point for us.
So they have Barclays Capital has a co-working space in New York City that they kind of give to groups to hold events, sometimes free of charge, sometimes not. I'm affiliated with the New York University Entrepreneurship Lab, so we've done events through there. That whole partnership was organized through that. But the venue's like beautifully constructed. It's in the Flatiron District, which is near that triangle building that you have definitely seen in New York. It's like that neighborhood. And it's just beautifully designed. It looks really cool, and it makes you kind of be like, oh, what is this? They have a cafe in the back, and we get that whole area for our event. And when you get in there, it's like, it just feels comfortable. It feels inviting. You feel special because you probably didn't know about it, and it doesn't look like that from the street, as most things in New York don't. So I think from that, once you get in there, like one thing I think I've heard you say, Scott, too, is it's like the importance of a name tag, right? Like the first thing.
You've heard me say it, or you've heard me cry over it. But anyway, we can do a podcast on name tags.
But in my events, because it's not as they're just public, and it's a very, very different group of people. Like first impressions mean a lot, and whatever way you can add that first impression in mind, it's like a venue. So it's like coming to this room, it's like, oh wow, this is cool. What's here? Oh, there's pizza, there's beer. Cool, I feel at home. Sets people in a comfortable position, and then from there, the rest of it, they're much more open to hearing about what's happening in there, and then coming back and telling their friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the venue itself is an opportunity, again, to show who you are. We just talked about the food and the coffee, and I think the venue should also be aligned with who you are. So for us, I mean, we could have this event at like some hotel at the Park 55 conference room or something like that, but it's like, okay, brown walls, brown floor, brown chairs, white tablecloth. It's super boring. We spent a lot of time on Peer Space, which, by the way, if you haven't checked out Peer Space, it's PWER space, a great place to go find venues. And so we did a lot of searching. Stephen and Julian found the place where we use. It's called the Producers Loft in the Mission. And they just searched, and we had lots of criteria that we were looking for. It needed to be kind of funky. It needed to feel different. It needed to feel like we wanted people to get out of their office space and into a creative space, because we're really talking about your business. We're going to getting outside of the building, so to speak. And so there's tons of places out there now, and it's so much more accessible with websites like PeerSpace that you don't have to do it at some stodgy hotel, or you don't have to do it in some conference room. You can get really creative with these spaces, and people really appreciate it. So that's definitely, the venue is a big part of that as well. So
definitely.
So I guess last couple of thoughts I've got here on my notes, like even if you can't do and kind of sponsor your own events, and organize your own event from soup to nuts. One of the things that I've done in the past with different startups is we've actually piggybacked on other bigger events. So when I was at Altos Research and at Applia, which are two different startups, we rented suites in the hotel where there were other bigger conferences. And so what we did is we would have like semi-private events. So as people were coming to the booth, or we had our customers, we'd say, hey, we're going to have a customer only event upstairs from 5 to 7, and we're going to bring in food and hors d'oeuvres, and we'll have some drinks there, and we're also going to have so and so as a guest. They're going to do like a 30-minute talk about such and such topic. When I was at Applia, the speaker we used was our founder, a guy named Paul Romer, who just happened to win the Nobel Prize this year. So this is going back 15 years. At the time, even then, before he won the Nobel Prize, everybody in that world knew, like, they're like, oh, Paul Romer, really? Yeah, he founded the company. He's going to go talk for 30 minutes. So everybody was like, oh, I want to go hear Paul speak. So he was the draw. So it turns out he won the Nobel Prize this year. People have been expecting that for years in the economics world. But in other cases, we would have guest speakers come in, and they could be, somebody who's like a compliance expert, if that's important to your market, or it could be somebody who's a customer expert, if that's important to your market, or somebody who's a marketing expert, if that's important to your market. Whatever it is, you can say, hey, we're gonna have that person come and talk, and you have to pay them a little bit. It's definitely worth it. And so we did suites in the hotel, and we just made it kind of a customer only event. Or bring a friend. It's customer plus. You can bring a colleague from another company or another university if you want to, and that created some intimacy. The other thing we did at Altos Research is, in the real estate industry, they had there was this going back again about 10 years ago. They had what were called bar camps, which kind of riffed off of the software bar camps. And so what we did at these larger events where there was a couple hundred real estate agents, we had one of our sessions at the bar camp was an Altos user group. And so we just carved out 30 minutes, and people that used our stuff could come and ask questions. So even that was just 30 minutes, but it created a customer environment. And then at bigger events, we would sometimes host a cocktail party or something like that. So there's all kinds of ways that you can get creative with this. It doesn't have to be some big 2-day event like we do. It can be a half a day. It can be at a bigger event. But most importantly, what I would say is, like, just to wrap up here, is look for a way to remove that digital shroud that you have, because even the best relationships that you have with your customers can get even better if you can create some community. You can teach them stuff. You can help them problem solve. You can help them plan, because they will love you forever, because they don't get this from other places. So before we wrap up, Stephen, anything else you want to add?
One thing we used to do too is you'd rent an Airbnb near a conference, get a private chef, and invite your customers. Very unique, very different, very small, very intimate, and probably not as expensive as you might think to rent that for a night. Huge value, very personal, very invite friendly. Might be a good thing to play around with.
Dude, I love that. So anyway, that's fresh in our mind. We want to encourage you, if you're thinking about ways to create better relationships with your customers, really put yourself on a pedestal and remove yourself from the rest of the crowd. I think this is a huge opportunity for you guys to do this with live events. So, all right. Well, I think that's a good place to call for now. Thanks so much for listening into the Startup Selling Show. We really appreciate it. Stephen, thanks for carving out time. I know you spent an endless amount of energy last week in San Francisco. We're right back at it the Tuesday after. And thanks for making time amongst all the other stuff that we're working on right now. Really appreciate the insights and the expertise you shared here.
Thanks for having me, and like, comment, subscribe, and tell some people about the show. Everybody.
I love that. Thanks. All right, guys. Have a good one. See ya.